Yo, let's go! Ancient City, written in 1854, and this is the oldest book we've ever done. But this guy has such a great topic, perspective, very unique. He really wants to figure out where culture came from. And so we're going to tell you the story of how he figured this out, what book he wanted to write. Numa, Denis, Fustel, de Coulanges.
Hello? Salud?
French dude, Numa is what we're going to call him. Numa Denis. Numa, yay. So here's the thing. Historians forever have studied what's happened since people started writing. That's what historians do. They read old stuff and they tell you what happened. Every potential piece of historical data, the further you go back, the less of it there is, obviously. It's been combed by sociologists, scientists, paleontologists, geneticists, Indiana Jonesologists, historians, whatever. But what happened before people started writing stuff down? And that's what Numa does.
Definitely a dark spot in studying, which Numa devotes his book to, which is really cool. And he does not contextualize it very well. This is the first outline we've done. This is better than the book. If you like this, read the book by all means, but this is better than what the book was.
We're going to make more sense. Numa is great.
Yeah.
He's also really confusing and what are you saying, Numa?
Or just very dry and the fire and the sacred this and that. And when you contextualize it, damn, this is literally what the cultures were pre-Greek, pre-Roman. This is kind of a taste of the Indo-European mixed with the Mediterranean to contextualize it. Maybe 1000 BC, something like that. Maybe even before 2, 3, 4,000 BC.
Yeah.
It's TBD, the BC.
Yeah, roughly 1,000 to 10,000, 1,000 to 5,000 BC. So that's kind of what he's talking about. And, to learn more about humans, we read about chimps, right? Because that's our genetic ancestor or whatever. That's going back to 2 million, 3 million, whatever million BC, right?
Yeah.
And so he is taking a different tack. He's I want to research the humans that were pre-writing and what they were like. So I like this angle on studying who we are.
Yeah, post-village, pre-city, kind of the rise of cities is how to contextualize this. And interestingly, the main point is religion played 10 times as big of a role as anybody thought. You used to think irrigation, agriculture, good floodplain, boom, you got a city. A lot more going on with, who you're worshiping and how you're able to link up with that little village over there. And hey, we probably have an ancestor 10 back. He probably was a pretty great guy. Boom, God. That's where gods are coming from.
If you're going to talk about the rise of states, you got to have the rise of cities first. This is after humans dominated the animal kingdom, started settling down, like he said. What happened to create an actual city? Numa makes a point, I think it's sentence 1, but he's history really begins with Greek and Roman culture, and we started writing and governing and everything.
His history. That's the world he's in, yeah. Which, it's when you think 1860, Africa's still unknown continent, and we probably heard of China once, but it's interesting to think about. So it gives you an interesting perspective about how cultural based we are, how imaginative we are, and how much these religions really mean to us. David Foster Wallace, everybody worships. That's a great line. Everybody worships. Especially coming from him. Weird atheist guy, but everybody worships. Religious belonging is more important than whatever you believe. This book kind of proves that out, but it discusses what the stuff they were actually believing back then that generated their sense of belonging. And actually the believing and the belonging were a lot more tied together.
Yeah, you better believe if you want to belong, and trust me, you want to belong. So we're going to talk all about belonging, and that is, JD's kind of spilled a little bit of the beans here, but that's the fundamental insight of Numa, is that for reality, for ancient man, religion was above everything. So he goes back, he wants to find out about ancient man, and his statement is everything about ancient man was religious.
Yeah, and I feel like the above everything kind of, that's correct in a sense, but it's also below and everything, you don't even think about, religion isn't even a word that's separate from reality. Your reality is completely infused with what we now would call religious belief, but they would just call normal life, Yeah, it's very, very hard to wrap your head around how tied in together. But this looks like a good place to read one of your quotes. The claim is that the fundamental religion of the Greco-Roman world was ancestor veneration. There's where the believing and the belonging get a lot more tied together. And that everything else was incidental to or derivative from that. Everything that we understand as society and institutions today, governments, laws, customs, has its foundations in ancient man's religion of ancestor veneration. Picture Mulan, lighting the incense at the graves. That's what people were doing around the world, thousands of years upon thousands of years.
Yep. The story of humanity dominating is one of how religion united us to dominate. Ancient man was about religion. That was everything in his world. And the religion of ancient man was that of venerating, worshiping your ancestors. So if you want to understand the world today, you have to understand countries. If you want to understand countries, you need to understand where they came from. And we're going into a whole thing with rise of states, but countries first started as a united set of cities. So that's why we're going all the way back to talk about cities. And we're going to go over the city founding rituals that they would go through because they're pretty cool and they're pretty interesting. This is the first line of the book. So just to kind of set the scene here, and we're going to get into chapter 1 in a second, but quote, "It is proposed here to show upon what principles and by what rules Greek and Roman society were governed."
It's kind of like the thesis statement.
Numa is like, you guys look back and see, and you think you recognize us? You're just looking in a mirror. That's not us. And he even goes, quote, "We rarely fail to deceive ourselves regarding these ancient nations. To evaluate the ancient nations, we need to go before them and start with the earliest recorded writings, figure out what the earliest writers were saying about history earlier than they were. Where did the traditions and rituals of those people come from? What was the logic behind the way things were when we finally started writing?" That is what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So if you're gonna look at things this way, you're gonna immediately see how absolutely darn religious everything was. Do not underestimate ancient man's religion.
Book 1, Ancient Beliefs, Subchapter 1.
There's only 5 chapters in the whole book, so we got to do a subchapter thing too, by the way. Just
yeah. Subchapter 1, notions about the soul and death. And here he's saying death and the afterlife, well, everybody says this, reside at the core, which still was back then, quote, "Go back far as we may in the history of the Indo-European race, of which the Greeks and Italians are branches, and we do not find that this race has ever thought that after this short life, all was finished for man. That all ancient societies believed the same thing, that after death, the soul was enclosed in the grave."
That's where the soul goes.
And you got to keep it there. And then here's the extra thing. The grave is beneath your house.
Not beneath your house, but on your land. It's part of where your home, your hearth it is. Yeah.
So the interesting aspect, so doing extra little research for the book, I've been listening to Tides of History and reading some ancient, like Western hunter-gatherers. I mean, like the Europeans pre-Indo-European invasion. The archaeology shows that people would live generation on generation on generation and bury the dead underneath their home and just put all of the refuse and broken pots and everything under the home, so it starts forming a hill. And so people live on these hills. They're like fortified little sediments of a hill where all your ancestors are buried and all your broken pots and all the leftover whatever. That would make you want to defend it a lot more than if you were just moving around all the time, So that's kind of an interesting psychological benefit to staying put. And so Numa's saying that the gravestones were, on the land and everything, which is similar. But, for a lot of these, you have to imagine they're probably just shoving them right under the house. And talk about ancestor veneration to, and defending your land when grandpa's under the floorboards.
Not only would you bury your family on your property, but part of the belief of ancient religion was that soul now lives in that grave, wherever it is on your property. That soul needs to be nourished after it's dead. You need to give it food, clothing, shelter. You need to pray to it. It needs arms. It needs protection.
It needs wine.
It needs wine. You pour wine. Hey, pour one out. Literally pour one out, right?
Yeah.
This is ancient religion. It's building the tomb for the afterlife because you're going to spend the rest of your life in that tomb. You want to have a good life.
And here he's saying that the soul that had no tomb, no grave, became a phantom that haunted its ancestors forever. And if you didn't have a family to take care of your grave, your soul would suffer for eternity. It's like Coco. You got to be on the mantle. You got to have your picture on the Dia de Muertos.
Dude.
It's very similar.
This book was written same decade that Darwin wrote On the Origin of Species. Numa's not talking about evolution, but I'm talking about it. If you don't have a family to take care of your grave after you die, you will suffer for all eternity. That's a super powerful evolutionary idea because it has so much behavior defining info for your life and so much evolutionary power. Like, what type of person would you be in your life if your entire goal was that your descendants take care of your grave after your death?
Yeah.
You'd be a good family leader, one that would inspire them to take care of you after you die, right? And obviously families who had good inspiring family leaders would have better chance of survival or reproduction because you need your kids to care for you after you're dead. It's actually fascinating how this ancient religion kind of can perpetuate itself just by creating humans that are better survive, right?
That's a powerful evolutionary belief, and that's a good contextualization of it. So I think that brings us on to subchapter 2, Worship of the Dead, which we're already in. Since the dead live forever in their underground grave, the ancients had rituals about how to care for them. This is the big part of the book, and what are these rituals like?
Well, animal sacrifices, dead gotta eat.
Obviously.
A lot of wine pouring on grave sites, dead gotta drink. Listen to the list of ancient cultures who followed the rules for caring for ancestor graves.
Hellenes, the Latins, the Sabines, the Etruscans, and the Aryas of India. The Arya is where you get Aryan from, and it's totally, obviously the German one was a bastardization of it, but those Aryas were the Indo-European speaking Persian-ish tribe that came into the Indian subcontinent and spread Hinduism, the Rig Veda, and Sanskrit, and all that. So there actually is a lot of connection between what this book is talking about with Greco-Roman and probably a lot of what the Aryas and other Indo-Europeans people kind of religion was going on. Because it's saying even in the present day, Hindus make offerings to their ancestors. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff, Christianity wiped it off here, but not necessarily everywhere else. Quote, "This belief and these rites are the oldest and the most persistent of anything pertaining to the Indo-European race." And so here, he's talking about Indo-European race, which in a sense, we're all coming from the Yamnaya around 4,000 years ago, from the steppe. A lot of the religion and language that they took spread to Europe and India, mixed with the local culture / took them over. It's crazy. I've listened to so many genetics podcasts and read articles and stuff. Men from Europe gone when the Indo-Europeans come. All the Y haplogroups of the ancient European hunter-gatherers and farmers and stuff, gone. Like 5% left. These Yamnaya men and their forebears or afterbears just completely wiped everybody out and took over the mating with the women, and it's totally crazy. He's talking about the Rig Veda, which is like, that's the Iliad of the Hinduism a little bit, just like super ancient stuff. So
ancestor worship is another form of worshiping your creation story. Everyone has a creation story. Hey, mom and dad, where do we come from? We came from our ancestors is the most common, most simple, most universal, economical story. So of course we're going to ancestor worship because that's our creation. There's more to ancient religion than ancestor worship. That's just a huge part of it. That's why we emphasize it so strongly.
Well, here's another part is subchapter 3, sacred fires. This is the big part of your ancestor worship is everybody has a fire. What's rule number 1?
Rule number 1, take care of ancestors' graves. Rule number 2, don't you ever let the fire go out. Your ancestral home fire, doesn't matter where you see it across Europe and Asia, sacred obligation to keep that fire going. The ancient words for an extinguished hearth or an extinguished family were synonymous. It was the same word because that's how deep the rule of keeping the fire going went.
Yeah, that's crazy. That is
they
super
had
crazy.
Special methods for letting it cool down, the fire, At night, before firing it up in the morning, they had rules about what wood could be used. Can't put trash in it. Can't commit sins in front of the fire.
You want? I would have a sacred rock in my house with the kids. That hey, you can't do any sins in front of this rock. Put it right in the middle of the house. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Just to give you a sense of how deep this religion went. Men would pray to the fire before they left the home. They would return home. They'd say prayers to their home fire before they would kiss their wife. Like that's the kind of
before you kiss your wife, you pray to the fire. That's so crazy.
Because you're praying to your ancestors. That is like, thank you for bringing me back home. Yeah. Meals were religious acts cooked over the sacred fire. They would also offer a portion of the meal back into the fire because ancestors got to eat. We already talked about. Mm-hmm. You can imagine how much the fire loved wine. If you're a little kid, how fun that would be to see the fire have some wine. Mm-hmm. We've talked about the rules around ancestor worship. The sacred fire was huge. It's going to come back quite a bit when we start getting to cities. But this subchapter 4 here is about the domestic religion. It's really how much this religion was focused on your home and your family.
It completely revolved around your family and your ancestors, which obviously is different than what we are used to today. Because today, there's one God. He's accessible to everybody. But back then, it was just my family. It would be completely different from his family over there or my wife's family. In that case, it's very interesting. I don't know if we talk about it here, but the woman just leaves her family behind, stops praying to her family god, only prays to the man's family god.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead to the marriage ritual that we're going to get to in a minute. But yeah, so every family, we have our own gods, we have our own ancestors, and we don't want other people knowing about our gods, praying to our gods. It was very exclusionary, this ancient religion. It was purely domestic. Our ancestors will only accept offerings from true members of the family. There's a whole bunch of rituals around who is a true member of the family. Each family had as many gods as they had ancestors. Another little note, Numa talks about it quite a bit, but this is religion of the domestic, of the family. All parts of the family were male-dominated, male-controlled, male everything. So he kind of goes over, he doesn't really answer why it was all male-dominated and males ran everything, but I know JD has some theories, but it's just a point that he makes, that it's all about male-run, male-dominated, male is the priest, everything.
I think the standard theory would be that it's the Indo-European culture, because interestingly, the Western hunter-gatherers and European farmers, we don't know what their religion was like, but one of the main traces of their culture in the archaeology is what's called Venus figurines, which are just little, thick woman dolls. Maybe that was some sort of deity. It was kind of like fertility thing, but we know for a fact that the Indo-European culture was completely male dominated, and that's why you have raiding sons that go out and conquer other people and turn them into your vassals and everything. And so that's probably where the male obsession / centeredness came from.
The warrior culture.
Looks like we've made it onto book 2.
The family. Subchapter 1, religion was the constituent principle of the ancient family. And Numa makes a point right here. He's like, don't let the word religion fool you. We're using a modern word, religion, to talk about what for them was just how life is. It's reality, I would say, more for them. To use another little David, we're getting double David Foster Wallace in this podcast today, but he's got that whole essay, This is Water, and you're a fish, you don't recognize you're in water. It's the same. You're an ancient man. You don't recognize that you're in religion because the religion is your reality, right? So
your water,
don't try to relate what we're talking about religion to anything that any of us would experience today, because it's just not. It's just what the world. It's not like you're growing up, man, church is dumb. It's like, no, this is your family. This is your life. This ain't some Sunday morning song shit, all right, bro? Yeah. So these ancestor gods were more akin to Sauron's eye plus Big Brother's camera plus the president's press secretary all in one. All you have is your family. All you grow up, you can't drive anywhere, you can't fly anywhere. I mean, you're in your town, you're in your family. Like, this is it for you. Your family is your religion is your family. Your membership in the family itself was dependent upon how well you practice religion. If you adopt someone, that means that you're inviting them to worship your family ancestors. Weddings were a ceremony to transfer a religious ceremony to transfer brides from one religion to another. It was like a religious initiation ceremony was what a wedding was.
Yeah, it actually says this was an immutable law that someone could not invoke 2 sacred fires to 2 sets of ancestors. Immutable. Can't do it.
Dude, you can only have one. So marriage was a grave step for a young girl. As a young woman, you're giving up everything you know, your family, your religion, all the traditions that you've had your whole life in order to transfer to a new family's sacred fire and their religion and their rituals, which are different from your family's. And listen to this, dude. Ancient marriage ceremony. We got a 3-step process here for you because it's so good. Step 1, her father, the bride's father, frees her from her current religion with a private religious ceremony at her house that she grew up in. Bride's family only, because it's a religious family and only your family practices your religion. Yeah, you gotta
keep that secret.
Yeah. Gotta keep that secret. Step 2, husband then goes to bride's family's house and symbolically carries her from her house of her family to his house, right? For this step, the bride wore a veil and a crown. Crowns were big-time religious symbols. More to come on these crowns. Brides wore white, a very religious color. When the bride got close to the husband's home, the husband would pretend to steal her. Oftentimes, the bride's friends would pretend to fight the husband to keep her. And this is super duper important. Husband would eventually carry her through the doorway, but don't you dare let your bride's feet touch the door sill, or you just ruined the whole ceremony.
The whole ceremony's ruined.
That's crazy. So there's this sort of, you can see it in, it's almost like we're stealing you from your religion and bringing you into our religion. And then step 3 of this wedding process is bride accepted into husband's religion with a ceremony led by, if I want to get married, I'm not in charge of my religion. My father, my grandfather, my oldest male, in line, he's in charge of religion. So he's the one that's running the ceremony, like grandpa, to bring the bride into our religion.
And I love that Andrew's tying it into chimpanzee politics here, because similar to with chimps, where the female chimp leaves her tribe and joins the tribe of, a new tribe and mates with the males in that tribe. But yeah, it's interesting. I think different species kind of flip-flop on that, though. I don't think that's like a hard rule, but I wonder what it says about our culture that women did it. And I wonder if, I'm sure there are many cultures where men leave and join the woman's tribe. That would be interesting to do like a little comparative study on that.
Are there cultures where the men leave and join the women's tribe? I don't know.
I'm sure there are. Dude, there's even a culture where one woman has multiple husbands. I mean, if you're talking the most it's only one tribe, but they're still around in China. Subchapter 3, the continuity of the family.
Very important, Jay. Continuation of the family line was of prime importance because all of your ancestors and however far your family goes back are relying on you, current male leader, to continue the family line far into the future. And if you don't, then no one will be there to take care of the thousands of years of ancestors, and you're going to condemn all of your family to eternal damnation and
not
suffering.
Only condemn them, but probably you would imagine that you would be condemning yourself to not being worshipped in the afterlife. I wonder what people thought about their kids that died before having kids. I wonder if they would think, oh, well, they're kind of looped in with the family, or they're, burning
We're going to get into that. There's a whole bunch of rules around what counts as family and everything like that. But a kid who died, if you have more family still, you can still be part of the family. It's just you can't lose the line,
Yeah.
So we all know about king must have a son so he can, the reign will continue. It's not just kings back then. It's every family, right? Dude, listen to some of these ancient laws, and you can see how important family is. So we're kind of jumping ahead to when laws were eventually written. These are like a smattering of some of the first laws written. Okay,
first these of all, are just unspoken probably, but yeah.
Well, eventually, no. These are written down laws. When we finally started writing them down, celibacy, major crime in most of the ancient world. Like, you're not allowed to be celibate, bro. Ancient. Dude, that ain't gonna work. Laws surrounding what counts as an official son were very strict. It had to be a son of an official religious marriage. That's why bastards were treated so poorly. They had no religion. They had no true family. They were never accepted into the family. India had a law for sterile women. If you women can't give you a child after 8 years, you are legally allowed to replace her. That was that time.
Yeah.
That was a law.
I don't know if this is still in India, but if the husband was sterile, you take the husband's brother or another close relative would step in with some blessed seed.
You like that, don't you?
Spicy.
But hold on. If your brother stepped in with some blessed seed to help you procreate because you don't have it, the son was still yours.
Wow.
That's so we're talking about
Because keeping it in the family religion. It's like the same thing.
Family religion, exactly. Here's another option. If you had only daughters, as part of a marriage contract for one of your daughters, you could slip in a steal your son clause, truth,
Wow.
and you could say, hey, potential son-in-law, you seem great, good dowry, appreciate it. One final piece I'm going to add to the contract, please don't redline it. This daughter's first son is actually mine, because I haven't had any sons yet. So I'm going to let you marry her, but I get the first son. Isn't that crazy, dude?
That is so crazy. Yeah.
Dude, and there's many recorded instances of male grandchild inheriting directly from the grandfather. So we're going to there's whole rules about inheritance and everything, but like inheritance was a religious ceremony, and like, it's the passing of the family torch to the next person.
Yeah. Here's a good subclause that if your brother bangs your wife or the steal your grandson strategies don't work, ancient religion apparently offered some strict adoption processes, which was kind of a family religion initiation ceremony to bring someone in. And so all your ancestors are like, whew, thank God we've got someone who's going to be keeping the fire lit.
Dude, can you imagine some old guy who's like, dude, I tried to steal your grandson. I had 16 daughters.
Yeah.
I need a son. And they're like, all right, we'll make an adoption process for you, but only for you,
Yeah.
So that's the kind of, so that it shows you, ancient religion, ancestor veneration, family, home, hearth. This, you worship with your family. This is how it works.
So let's get to property, subchapter 6.
And subchapter 6, the right of property is, okay, now we're talking about actually where your family, your home base, right? This is your church. Religion placed family above all. You had to get in the religion through the initiation ceremony that obviously took place at your family home, your family plot of land, the family tomb, the family hearth, the family, it's the church.
These are your sacred spots.
Yeah, property rights that we all believe in today. Don't come to us from the Constitution. Don't come to us from the Magna Carta, the Law of 12 Tables. It was this ancient religious belief that a family's property was truly its holy land. That's where property rights come from, Jay.
That's interesting. I would read a small article on the history of property rights. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, we're going to give you some more details right now, dude. Property borders are fascinating. They would have boundary stones to mark the edges of the property. These boundary stones had gods called terminus, and these gods had their own rituals, sacrifices. They got wine poured on them too. And to minimize religious disputes, this is much later, but just to give you a sense of where property rights got in the time of Rome, Rome had a very strict 2.5 foot free space between properties, so that nobody's property was anyone else's. There was this little safe zone where you didn't have holy lands fighting over whose was whose, right? And selling your property was a massive religious ceremony. You needed priestly approval. You need a huge sacrifice. I mean, it's a huge thing to change the property of your family.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I bet the 2.5 space had a god associated with it too. And what this reminds me is you're using God and religion. I mean, these are all such ubiquitous disputes, and you have to come up with rules and stuff. And the only basis that you would have for keeping rules consistent between people is to make it religious. Fukuyama makes the same point, that rule of law kind of stems from a religious tendency in us to come up with ideas that transcend the normal person. Normal individual, do whatever you want, and the only platform that you can place those transcendent sort of rules is in a religious context. And then that reminds me of the guy we follow on Twitter, Cameron Harwick. He must be a postdoc, economics or whatever. He wrote an article about how money kind of filtered through and transferred a lot of those religiously rules based, where here you needed a religious rule to separate your property, and all of a sudden you got money and you're paying lawyers and there's contracts and stuff, and so kind of money filters in to handle the same issues that religion would have handled in ancient days, and obviously does it a lot more efficiently, is able to spread and connect a lot more people on similar grounding. And you could see how people would be solving these problems back then.
Money makes a lot more free. You can take money from anyone. You can't have religion from anyone. That's the difference.
Yeah, or this is my family's property and this is my church, and you don't have a right to it until money just buys the church right from out under you. And fair price. I'm selling what's that line? I'm selling a fair good to a willing market or something.
Pave paradise and put up a parking lot, baby. There you
That's
go.
another one. Yeah.
So if your number one worry, and we're in subchapter 7, the right of succession, big part of ancient religion was what happens after you die. If your number one worry in life is who will take care of me after I'm gone, then it was very important to have a well-organized succession plan. And succession determined it wasn't like you could, 50% to them, 50%. It was one person got everything, right? Mm-hmm. The house, the money, whatever, the slaves, whatever you owned as a person. In all the rules of succession boiled down to traversing the male lineage for closest, most appropriate relative. So obviously your son is number one, but if there is no son, could be grandson, could be brother, nephew. Otherwise, if you had nothing below, you could go above, and you could go, up to your brother, your grandpa, then down to a cousin, I don't know, twice removed or whatever. But you had to go male lineage to the closest family male lineage. That's how succession, that's how inheritance worked. First will, it started with my closest male relative gets everything. And eventually, wills got a little bit more complicated, and there's a whole thing on wills in this book. But since succession was so clearly defined by the male lineage, any deviation from this was deviation from religious practice and required heavy priestly intervention.
You just see a bunch of old grandpas getting involved in your business. Here's what I find interesting, that some religions required you to make the will public while you're still alive. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, everything was probably so public back in the day.
Yeah, no kidding. And we've mentioned it, but just to kind of tie it up as far as authority in the family, this is like our subchapter 8. Ancient conception of family was actually a barrier to development of cities because the father was the chief priest, the chief judge, the mayor, the tax collector. The father doesn't manage, he dictates his family. The Latin word for father is pater. You got padre, you got papa, pater, thank you. It had so many more meanings than just dad. By the way, pater, same word, Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit.
There's the Indo-European thing.
It was specifically reserved for head of house, not just your father. So pater was your chief priest of your family religion. That's who pater was.
The ancient conception of family was a barrier to the development of cities. There's an interesting article that was written by Eric Howell, who's a Twitter Substack writer, and he wrote a very interesting book called The Gossip Trap. Why weren't there big cities 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago? Like, why did it take so long, in a sense, if we've been biologically, behaviorally similar? His idea is that we were gossiping ourselves into a trap where no man or woman was ever able to get enough resources or enough leadership ability or whatever, because everyone would always push them down because you never wanted anyone to take too much power. Everyone had to be kind of on equal footing. And, do you see, he's so proud he bagged an elk today, but, it probably tastes like shit. And battling would come through gossiping about, their family god sucks. Did you hear he only had daughters?
Yeah, dude. Can't believe that. Subchapter 9, Morals of the Ancient Family. Imagine the ancient man. Let's get into his head for a minute, Jay. Let's do a little Dan Carlin, feel what it's like to be ancient man. Mm-hmm. You wake up, you say your prayers at the hearth to your ancestors. You believe that all your ancestors are present and can see all your actions at all times. Sauron's eye. They know, they see. Think of how that would change your programming if your ancestors see everything that you see, like they know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You believe that the perpetuity of your family is the meaning of your life. Can you imagine what your wife cheating on you would do to you? So adultery, that's why adultery is like the greatest crime. Mm-hmm. Good news, though. Religious laws gave fathers the right to reject illegitimate sons.
Good news.
Dude, yeah.
Phew.
And again, this is very pro-evolution. It just makes sense that the human race would evolve this way.
Evolution doesn't care what makes us happy or human rights or anything. It's just like whatever creates groups that reproduce themselves at a higher rate and more sustainably. That's all it is.
Self-replicating meme. We're kind of traversing through time here. So this ancient religion, this book 1, a lot of it is sort of like the beliefs of ancient pre-Roman, pre-writing man. So we kind of covered the religion in its major points. And we're moving slowly closer towards Rome. And really just where this book ends is Rome, is Christianity. That's kind of where the story of this book ends. So we're inching closer, but he does a whole chapter on what is called the gens at Rome, the gens at Greece. And I mean, I just can't help but point out the gens is sort of like families as they get bigger, they turn into gens. Because as you can imagine, Jay, like, you know, religion of ancient family was going on for tens of thousands of years. Eventually, we run into some family problems. It only takes 2 to 3 generations for families to grow pretty significantly, right? And now you got trouble on the farm. You got too many people, right?
Here, we'll just real quick get a definition of gens. I looked it up. A group of families in ancient Rome who shared a name and claimed a common origin.
We're getting closer to the formation of cities here because, okay, you know,
part
thousands
neighbors, part cousins. Yeah.
Thousands of generations, you start getting big families.
Well, thousands of generations, yeah, you would get a big family.
Ancient societies started worshiping larger familial groups. Hey, we should probably all do the same ceremony since we all have the same ancestor. By the way, gens, what they called like their wider, you know, family group, is 1 letter away from genes. But the gens, key thing about the gens, it also had a pater, a chief, judge, priest, CEO of the gens. So you still had one sort of family that was above the rest of the families too in this gens.
And above is in the sky, which is the word from God, which we've discovered linguistically, the actual Indo-European word. Like this is 5,000 years ago on the steppes of Ukraine and Kazakhstan. They called him sky god, Deus Pater. That's where Zeus comes from, Zeus. That's where Deus comes from. Once you go so far back, you're with the guy across town and you're like, all the way back, our sky father's the same. Let's call him Zeus. Let's be Greeks. You know, it just kind of forms after a bunch of years.
That's a great connection. I did not know the Deus Zeus. That is cool. Gens kept getting bigger, more families. Eventually, they would start adopting other families as clients. Becoming a client to a family was a religious process, and in doing so, a man would acquire the protection of his gen leader, but commit his family to serve this gen leader for all eternity. So it's kind of, now we're getting into a little lord, you know, feudal lord serf kind of situation here, right? So again, getting bigger, getting these gens, these you know generation after generation, we're starting to put the pieces together for the formation of ancient cities by examining the beliefs and the ancient religion placed in the minds of everyone. Here's a really good quote by Numa to close out book 2 of the 5 books, and then book 3 is the city. So, you know, we're getting to the meat of the book here. But Numa, quote, "A family that by its religion maintained its unity, by its private law rendered itself indivisible, and through the laws of clientship retained its servants, came to form, in the course of time, a very extensive organization with a hereditary chief." Sound familiar? Ancient races lived this, was for a long succession of ages, thousands of little groups living isolated, having no need of one another, each with its own government and its own gods.
You can see why we rewrote it. This is a hard sentence to parse, and there's like 9 commas in the sentence. But yeah, I mean, you read it nice and slow. That sums it up. That like we've just got little family religions all spattered all across the Mediterranean and up into the Indian subcontinent and all of that. And then, you know, eventually people start joining up together, making larger cities, worshiping gods further and further back, and then connecting them up arbitrarily. And boundary gods of our little land turn into the boundary gods of the whole wider city. And that leads us to book 3, the city.
1864. So this one, the whole thing was building up. The ancient religion, your family, how people lived was building up. The name of the book is The Ancient City. So this is about the creation of cities. And book 3 is called The City. So we're paying it off quite a bit. Yeah. Subchapter 1, the phratry, the curie, the tribe. So just with that subchapter title, I think you can get a sense of where this is going. If we were talking about families and religion.
Because everybody knows phratries.
Phratries is also a little questionable. The ancient ancestor religion went on for some time, but eventually became possible for several families to celebrate a joint worship without sacrificing any of their own special religion. As your ancestors are your religion, then only you can celebrate that. But eventually that expanded because you want to make your religion bigger. So subchapter 2, religious beliefs. we're talking about ancient religion. We're going to go, JD's right. This book is very tangential. We're going to go on a slight tangent here to talk about the religion of ancient in their belief in nature.
Because the whole point here is that these families are coming up with gods that connect them rather than divide them. Obviously, the ancestors, if you don't share them, divide. So the gods of nature is what people are like combining gods over, and they start applying gods to, wind, storms, whatever. So here's a quote. As he judged external objects from himself and felt in himself a free person, he also, in every part of creation, in the soil, in the tree, in the cloud, in the water of the river, in the sun, so many persons like himself, he endued them with thought, volition, and choice of acts. And that's actually one of the parts that I find most fascinating about reading about American Indian history and stuff, is it's one of the few times that we have like a modern, everybody's writing things down, connecting with and finding out what people are doing when people don't write things down. It's a whole different way of looking at it. And yeah, there was spirits in the water, there was medicine in the sun, and the whole world is so much more magical in a way that we have just not been able to even imagine in 2,000 years.
And he also mentions in the book that ancestor religion was much more strict and formulaic with your ancestor worship, much less in the nature worship, which was much more fluid, magical, like JD said, from age to age. It was important, right?
He makes a point that a god of the sky is a god everyone can believe in because you don't need a family. And the god of the sky, Deus Pater, it was the Indo-European term. So like it was kind of already built in, and I guess people are coming together and being like, yeah, we'll believe in our ancestors, but we also got Deus Pater up there, Deus Zeus, stuff like that.
And back to the ancestor religions, but you can totally imagine after some time, people would be like, hey man, that family is doing great. Their ancestors must be awesome. Like, can they let us worship their ancestors? We want to do great too, right?
And the family's like, sure, hell yeah.
Yeah. Obviously they all have the sky gods and the sun gods. Let's throw that in there too, man. So this is sort of the joking description of the development of this like nature religion, this new, I don't want to call it competing, but sort of melding religion. People would build small altars to their nature gods on their home. They'd all have this, hey, you have a sun god, so do we. You have a moon god? Oh, wow.
The only way to link it up so the city starts getting bigger and villages get more powerful and can defend themselves better, all that kind of stuff. Here's a quote. When we see these temples rise and open their doors, we may be assured that human associations have enlarged. Love all the 1850s diction.
Yeah.
Very, very ancient.
It is. We may be assured.
Want to read the quote?
The ancient tribe was established as an independent body which had a special worship from which stranger was excluded. Once formed, no new family could be admitted. The tribal religion was opposed to this, but just as several curies were united into a tribe, the day on which multiple tribes joined together, the city existed. Let's go.
Curie is several families, and then several curies form a tribe, and then several tribes form a city. So there's lots of hierarchy of rules and deities, but I think one of the interesting points I remember, so I'm going to be tying in that Cameron Harwick paper that money ended up kind of filtering through and handling all of the transactional issues that religion used to handle. And one of his points was once religion got out of governing your everyday interactions with everybody, it was able to take on a life of its own, and people would turn believing into their whole identity, and there's all sorts of, very unique, extreme examples of religious following that you wouldn't get back then. I mean, you're lighting the hearse, you're doing the sacrifices, but nobody's going around whipping themselves in the back, for their river god or whatever, because you're just living your life. So it's kind of an interesting, when religion is so tied into your everyday life, it kind of constrains that extremist impulse in some religions that we see in medieval times and even now. So there's an interesting point.
Creating cities, they could be joined for lots of reasons: voluntary association, imposed by a superior tribe, one single powerful man saying, hey guys, we should all go over here together. But no matter how the creation happened, the key thing about the creation of a city was that they lit a sacred fire and adopted a common religion. That's how cities were formed, is like new church, right? New religious church right here. And we're going to go do we go over the actual ceremonial founding of Rome. The story is in here later, and it shows how much of it is, it's creation like a new church. So in talking about the creation of cities, and JD was saying tribes, curies, families, that's how armies were organized. That's how we know this stuff, right, Jay? We see voting distributed by tribes and curies and families. We see whole world divided into religious sects. All right, so I'm going to throw it back to you, Jay. What do we see here?
Follow the trajectory of an ancient boy to see how various groups worked. So first, the child is baptized into the family religion 6 days after birth. Years later, he enters the tribe through a tribal ceremony. At 16 or 18, at the city altar and in front of the smoking flesh of a victim. That's pretty crazy. And that's, we're ending the book basically with Christianity, metaphorical victim, But it's interesting to see that, it really is kind of going all the way back. Like, tons of big societies had human sacrifice. That was an oddly more universal than you would think. So at 16 or 18, you're at the city altar in front of the smoking flesh of a victim. The ancient boy is presented for admission to the city and becomes a citizen.
No, I got to jump back to what you just said about Christianity, because it's like the reverse, effect of burning at the stake. It's like the other side of whatever sacrifice, and that is a whole topic in 2 of our books on mimetic theory.
I don't get how it's reversed. It seems like he sacrificed himself.
Well, right, but it's always the church was the one that was good. We're sacrificing for the good, and now the church is the guy who got sacrificed was the church, So it was like the opposite. That's like the reverse, reverse perspective, whatever. More to come in that
podcast. So chapter 4, the city. So today, a city is formed over time. But, quote, with the ancients, a city was never formed by degrees. They founded a city all at once, all in a day.
There was a city, it's a religious act, the creation of a city. Yeah. And therefore, this religious ceremony had a birthday, had a July 4th for every city, had a Rome founding day. And so here's the ritual of the founding of Rome. Every founder of Rome, they all came from different places, and they brought a clod of earth from their home city, from their wherever they came from, right? Romulus, being the leader of Rome, he dug a trench and he threw the clod from where he came in. Obviously, everyone else threw their clod in, symbolizing the changing of the Holy Land of their ancestors to this spot. This trench that they threw their clods in was dug around the circumference or the edge, the perimeter of the city, except for key locations where the plow was lifted above the ground, carried. You lift it up, you basically create a pathway or a doorway, and then you put the plow back in and you keep going. It's sacrilegious to cross, that's the boundary. I think what is it called? The Pomeranium or something? Like the Pomerium. The Pomerium. Yeah. A little Dan Carlin. But it would be sacrilegious unless you cross the Pomerium through one of the specific doorways, right? Boom, I put it right in there, Pomerium. So after all that digging, so they dug the whole perimeter of the city in one day. What did they do, Jay? They went back to the city center.
Fire,
bang! Yeah.
Sacrifice some shit. Get ham-skied.
Probably the ham-skew is the last step. So probably wasn't the last step. It was probably a mid-step. But we know the date that Romulus performed his founding. Rome still celebrates April 21st as city anniversary today. Mm-hmm. So a city cannot lose the founding date and not lose the heart and soul of the city. You know what I mean?
So here's a sum-up quote. Every city was a sanctuary. Every city might be called holy. As the gods were attached to a city forever, so the people could never again abandon a place where their gods were established. So it's kind of a burning the ships and you're stuck here kind of vibe, Can't leave. It's part of your religion now. So what's the next chapter?
If you're going to be an incredible city, the only way is that you had an incredible founder, and so you better worship that founder. And so all these cities had birthdays with founders that were the later the city lasted, more magical. Subchapter 6, the gods of the city. Sacred fire was the most holy thing, which does appear like Jungle Book, by the way. A little Jungle Book action. In Rome, the Vestal Virgins, those were the people that covered the Rome fire.
And here's an interesting fact that cities would fight, obviously who wouldn't love to put out your enemy's city's sacred fire, but also you want to get the bones of the founder of your enemy city. Everyone's fighting over the bones of the cities and stuff. That's another, Dan Carlin talks about that in his Persian series of Assyria and Babylon keep battling over bones of, gods and founders of cities and stuff. It's capture the flag.
It is. It captured the flag bones and statues of the famous people because that like has their spirit in it and the great.
Yeah, your gods stuck. Our gods conquered your gods.
And like if you conquer someone else in battle, you'll like throw their bones in the river so that no one in all of history can worship their bones. You know, like that was like the worst kind of death, is to have your bones like basically thrown away. You know.
Yeah, and tell the story about Athens right here.
There was a story of Athens. They wanted to make war with a neighbor city. They were afraid because the neighbor city had super powerful god bones, and they didn't think Athens' gods were strong enough to overcome. So they built a temple to the other city's gods, the ones with the really good, really good vibes. They worshipped the other city's gods for 30 years. And also, I wrote this in there, but I'm so happy I wrote this. Isn't that kind of like the current generation saying, hey, I'll have my kids fight these guys. I don't want to fight these guys, right?
Yeah.
But whatever, that's what they did. Yeah, exactly.
We're working our ass off being devout here.
So that you guys can beat them. Anyways, it was an effective strategy. And then after 30 years, Athens went in, stole their god bones. And all this god bone stealing reinforces, the point. It was all about religion. And so we're stealing your power of your religion, ancestor worship, because you can't worship the bones if you don't have them, right?
Also, let's put ourselves in time a little bit, because the last chapter basically starts talking about how all this religious stuff kind of starts going away around 500, 400, especially by 300 BC. So like by Alexander, Socrates, Plato, like these are the world they're coming from, but the world is changing a lot. Like this, what we're talking about here, like God bones of founders and stuff, that's probably like 700, 800 BC or something, around like Homer. I think Homer was writing around 800 BC. So this could, whatever. It's like 3,000 years ago.
The Romulus stuff was around, I think 800 BC was Romulus, something like that.
Subchapter 7, the religion of the city. Quote, human association was a religion. Its symbol was a meal. Picture the heads of families assembled together at the same table, dressed in white, crown on his head, reciting the same prayers, pouring out the same wine, eating the same sacrificial food. Sounds a lot like the Eucharist, to be honest. That wasn't a quote. That was me.
The last part was a little added on. The calendar was basically just a list of the religious festivals, right? Two cities would have completely different calendars because they all counted up from the founding year of the city. It's year 5. Like whatever. We were founded 5 years ago, and they all had different dates and different religions and different ceremonies. I bet they copied each other's ceremonies a lot, but taking a census was the way to ensure that every city citizen was there at the religious festivals and no one outside the city was there. That's why they had census. Like, hey, this is our religion. You can't come in or out, right?
Yeah, that's so crazy.
And like the master censor of the city, whatever, would put every single individual in an exact rank of the city, right? Senators, knights, tribes, every man has a rank, and whatever you were ranked at the census, that's your rank until the next census. So have a great day. That's a big day for the ranking. So obviously the senators always met in the temple of the city. That's where the gods were. That's what their job is, to like be the God speakers, right? City armies, dude, there's tons of stories in the book about city armies and how they would like wait for the will of the gods. Sparta is my favorite example of like listening to their god for shit. They had a pre-battle religious ceremony, sacrificing victims and studying the spume entrails of these victims to read signs of battle success or failure. And there was a battle of Plataea. Spartans waited 4 days while being barraged by arrows, didn't even raise their shields to protect themselves until the entrails of the sacrificial victim said, we will win. And then the gods are like, all right, we're ready now, dude. And then they won. And then they won. All right. Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, yeah, that's a good placebo. That's like Space Jam when you drink the special water or something, Gods are telling us we're winning.
Dune 2, when he drinks the blue Gatorade. It could be any of that. So
the functioning of a city is only made possible by all of this religious dogma / transactional, imagined realities of how to deal with everybody.
Much of religion today is all about doctrine or theory. God says this, why, what does it mean, how we should act. Ancients didn't have doctrine. They had practice. Religious books were not philosophical. They were instruction manuals for rituals. So it's much more ritualized, templatized. One minor mistake in an important gesture in a ritual, and you might be buried alive. You screwed up the holy ritual. Like this, it's going to be a whole bad year. Someone needs to die for that.
Well, that sounds. I mean, I don't know about the punishment aspect, but to bring it to the Indo-European thing again, Brahmins in India have to recite incantations that are, I'm making this up, like an hour long or something. Nobody understands the language or whatever, but it's a very specific set of syllables that you have to repeat perfectly. And like your kid, starting at 4 years old, would study these, the Vedas or whatever, all the incantations or whatever to get every syllable exactly perfect and be able to recite them for all these different ceremonies and stuff. Very similar thing. I guess that's the way you maintain it over 1,000 years, is to make it the same, every generation.
There were prayers that did not work unless you like pirouette from the left foot to the right foot in the right way after the prayer was done. And, he makes a quote in the book: there was no occasion for innovation. Religion was a material bond, a chain which held man a slave. Ancient man may not have wanted that these gods are annoying, but he would never dream of offending them or saying that. But he might, it's a lot of work to do to make these gods happy. So because these religions were exclusionary and private, their books were super secret, and we don't have as many ritual instruction books as we wish we had. A little archaeology tip.
That is the truth. So chapter 9, government of the city, the king. With these ancient man religions, like the founders and whatever, only one type of government made sense. The king is the chief of politics and the head priest. They actually, they call him king, archon, consul, prytane. But also in the book, he calls him rex. Rex, he says, means priest. And I'm like, doesn't that mean king in Latin? It's like Tyrannosaurus Rex is like king lizard.
It does, and race is like king in Portuguese. So yeah, dude, yeah.
Rex
Ore do Timbal, dude. What's that song with the king of the Timbals? Ore do Timbal. Yeah, it means king. And this king was like a president plus a pope, all in one, right? Yeah. This chapter should be called Unity of Church and State, not the Magistracy, right? Government's power came from religion. For a time, Athens would pick its leaders by drawing names from a hat, a process of revealing God's will. Okay, government power came from the religion. Roman consuls were nominated by priests after a night spent staring at the stars for signs of which guy they should nominate, those priests. You think they didn't deal in power games to, about their nominations? Yeah. Romans voted only after priests sent the nominations. So, like, priests set the ticket, if you will. The only qualification for office: did you complete all the sacraments, religious sacraments properly, right? Sacraments, sacrifices, right? So, subchapter 11, the law. No man, they didn't write down ancient law. Law was given from the gods for men to follow. The source of the laws was the ancient religion of the family hearth. And throughout the rest of this, we're going to go over like lots of ancient laws, law of 12 tables and stuff. And it's like, you can see it's just the ancient hearth religion written down in like law form. But Plato even says it: to obey the laws is to obey the gods, right? Aristotle teaches us that before laws were written, they were sung. The Roman word for laws is verses. The Greek word for laws was literally songs. So these laws are prayers, right? That's where laws came from, right? Crazy, right?
Hot tidbit.
Dude.
Hot tidbit, right?
There you go.
That is such an interesting one. You don't think about that, laws being songs and verses. But again, that's coming from, I could be stretching it, but the Indo-European, I read a book on Indo-European religion to prepare for this. And since they were nomadic, they were in like cattle-drawn chariots, and they were riding horses around. So they didn't do much visual art or anything, but their art form was poetry, was verse. And so they would pass down generation to generation, poems and laws and, stuff like this. And that's obviously where the Brahmin thing came from, theoretically. And then, maybe that's where the Roman and Greek words kind of came from, as being like a... and it makes sense. If everybody's speaking a language family descending, wouldn't that tell you that those people thought their language was like of spiritual level importance? It's also a good way to connect people, is to, get them all to speak the same language and everything. And
And let's come together. Let's all sing the same song. It's easier to remember the song if it rhymes at the end, and we all know the story.
Paying your taxes to me, right? I love that song. It's a great song. 1, 2, 3.
Nice.
Chapter 12. Yeah. Citizen and soldier. So here's a start off quote for this chapter. You want to hit
us? Definition of a citizen was a man who had religion of the city. The stranger was one who does not a religion of the city. That's how they, that's everything. You're my neighbor, you're my friend, you're my religion, or you're not. You're an outsider, right? Just like you were only family if you followed the family religion, a citizen was a city religion person, right? If a man became a citizen after his son was born, his son was not a citizen when we would need to go through the citizenship process himself. Interesting little detail there. So this now we're talking about patriotism. Whenever you hear ancient stories, the punishment's always exile. Because, it kind of makes sense, dude. If you get exiled, another city's not just going to take you into their religion. So you're kind of, you're on your own. What, are you going to create your own city? Are you a lunatic?
Yeah.
You can't, dude. You just got exiled. Mm-hmm. So, and all the neighboring cities. They're the next city. So, you're in real trouble. So,
all your ancestors don't get worshipped anymore because your sacred hearth is gone. You're no longer in your sacred land. Big deal.
In Rome, capital punishment was exile. So they called capital punishment. That means you're exiled. So you have to leave your entire identity, right? So your family. If you're a man exiled, you lose your family. You can't even talk to your wife, your kids. They're not yours. They're part of the city's religion, and you're out. That's crazy, dude. Mm-hmm. So this obsession with this belief in the city had serious limitations. No ancient man of this time could conceive of multiple cities under one government, right? Because it's they all have different religions. So
you can't do multiple cities.
Yeah, limiting factor is the size of the temple, and they don't know my religion. So if you
conquered a neighboring city, you took over the city and placed every citizen in a form of submission. There was never a thought of blending governments. You just, you're our slave or servant or whatever because our gods beat your gods and we're not letting you worship our gods.
And so he even says in the book, ancient man was never able to conceive or establish anything beyond a city. They just couldn't figure it out. We're all here, and that's all. That's as far as we got for a really long time.
Kind of like a Dunbar's city,
Yeah.
Dunbar's number 150 is the amount of people 5,000. I mentioned this at the very end. Plato and his Republic, that was his ideal whatever. He was the city should be about 5,000. That's good. That's about what we can handle. Just interesting to think about.
Yeah, dude.
For them, you have to talk. You're not. There's not that many notes being handed back and forth, or pretty crazy,
dude. So you got Plato's number for cities. What is the the Denison number for planets? How much can a planet have?
The Denison number. I think we're topping out at 9 or 10 bill, and then
I don't know. I hope not. I hope we go to 20, 25. I think we can get. I think we can go a lot further.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Relations between cities. A prisoner of Rome may be able to spare his life by uttering this phrase, quote, I give my person, my city, my land, my boundary gods, my temples, my movable property, everything which pertains to the gods, to the Roman people. And then they're like, we're good. We'll let you live.
You gave it over to our religion? You're fine. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So this is a great summary of daily life of an ancient man in Rome or Athens, and just kind of, reminding everyone, okay, we're one of these ancient men in this time. What does our religion look like to us? So we don't leave our house without looking for unlucky birds. We walk out of the house always with the right foot first. We only cut our hair during the full moon. We have our house painted with anti-fire inscriptions on it. If I hear the cry of a mouse at a big assembly of people, I split. I can't, that is bad omen. I only boil my vegetables in the vegetable pots because they're the only ones I'm allowed to do it in. I have no clue why I do any of these things. They don't make sense. I don't know why I can't use that pot for the vegetables, except this is what I do. These are my rules, right? Mm-hmm. We're not talking about the plebeians. We're talking about the senators of Rome, the leaders of Rome or Athens or whatever, right? The leaders, right?
Yeah, because they're probably the ones that feel the pull of the religion and this is really important and I'm a big part of this. But the plebes are like, fuck, I'll walk out on my left foot. I don't have any ancestor gods to worship.
Dude, little hot take, was religion the first luxury belief? The peasants are like, dude, I don't have time to do that shit. I'm just trying to survive. But religion is like, luxury beliefs thing. Okay.
Well, it's an interesting, I'll just tie it in with another book we will talk about eventually, Secrets of Our Success, which talks a lot about...
which is right here, by the way. Bang. There it is.
Tradition and ritual and stuff. And like the one I remember was, a European is in the Amazon or in the Outback, and they're boiling up and grinding up some corn, and they throw a bunch of ash and some like seashells, ground up seashells in it. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And the guy's like, "I don't know. This is what my ancestors do." And he's like, "Well, don't do that." And turns out that was the only way to unlock a certain amino acid or neutralize the alkalis or whatever it was. But it's just an interesting. There's a good metaphor. There's a guy called G.K. Chesterton who I see a lot on Twitter. He's kind of like traditional, whatever. He's got a great little parable called Chesterton's Fence. And it was like you're walking in the country and you see a fence. Whoever put that fence up knew more than you knew when you're just passing by, So don't take the fence down because there is, you might think, oh, it's a big wide country. Why do we need a fence here? But they knew what they spent a lot of time constructing that fence. They knew more than you, so don't take it down. Which is kind of like these like tradition stuff. Like when we're here for such a short time, there's so many weird traditions, but you can't just start taking them out willy-nilly. You don't know what weird pillar of your culture that holds up or what alkali that subdues or, there's just a lot of, especially way back then, you just have no idea what's going on. So you're just following, what's this? I leave with the right foot. All right. Done. Like who knows? I could, how that's going to affect me. You don't know what diseases are. There's just so many unknowns. You're just like, I'm just walking the straight and narrow. Then,
dude, that was a great little tie-in with G.K. Chesterton, little bonus content. I like that a lot.
I mean, the Chesterton's Fence really ties in with Secrets of Our Success. I mean, there's just so many weird traditions and rituals and stuff that you'd be like, what does this have to do with anything? And it turns out when you look at like deep time has a lot to do with, things you couldn't even think about as just one little lifetime, Let's talk about the omnipotence of the state. It wasn't just silly rituals you had to follow. Your religion clearly defined that your city owned you.
The idea of individualism was laughable and inconceivable. Think about it this way. Military service requirements, Rome, military till you're 50. Athens, military till you're 60. Sparta, you're in the military your entire life. Like, welcome to the, happy birthday, you're in the military, you're born. The human person counted for very little against that holy and almost divine authority. The city, the state, whatever. Athenian law required you to get married. They had law for mothers. If your son died defending Athens, you must run around the city thanking the gods and be happy because your son, you contributed to the city. If your son returns to the city after losing a battle, you must be about the city mourning his return.
Talk about a phrase you just stole from the book. You must be about the city.
You must be about the city.
We don't use about as a verb anymore.
Yeah, that's funny. I had to retrain. But like that shows you, dude, in their control of mom reactions, your son dies and you have to celebrate. Talks about the power that the city religion had in the creation of your emotions, right? It created, I'm sure they were sad on the inside, but they were happy on the outside. So,
yeah, that's so interesting how it's like you're subduing yourself to the city, like your identity is larger, especially when other cities are coming to, they could just sail on over with a bunch of bow and arrows and take whatever they want,
Dude, you think you're going to get, and like in this situation, do you think you're going to homeschool your kids? Homeschool was firmly against the law, right? You are learning your city. You're part of the city, Chapter 4, the revolutions.
Revolution. So we've talked about the religions, building the city, and now once the city's been built, stuff happens to the religion, and the low class deals with the aristocracy, who deals with the king, and there's all sorts of dynamics that play out over time that developed into Athens, Sparta, and Rome, and stuff like that. So this
let me just
time again. We're probably like 600 BC ish, and when stuff cities start getting bigger.
600, 500. You're absolutely right on the timeline, and we've established now the sort of process of an ancient city, how it goes, and now he's like, all right, now we got these cities everywhere, And what happened was a period and a pattern of revolutions. And that's what this book is about, is the consistent pattern of all of these cities undergoing their own revolutions inside the city. So increasingly complex steps of human religious organizations. We got these gens, we got these tribes, eventually tribes get together. Now, subchapter 1, basically where he's getting at is like, as we got to these cities formation, there's the leaders of the city, but we're all kind of following like the leaders of the city's religion. And there's more and more generations of people growing, that there's less, we've all got combined to the same family beliefs and a city belief. These cities become hard to keep together. There's a lot of people. You can imagine what it would feel like your family line indentured to the one rich asshole of your fucking city. That's like the president and the king and the
Rex,
pope and the everything and the Rex. And, there's a lot more of us, right? So it creates this.
You're a plebeian. You don't have like family gods to go back to. You probably don't. You don't have a hearth. You might not own land. You're working the land for other people's gods. They probably let you worship. I'll throw you a great grandfather you can worship if you give me some corn and stuff like that.
And so this is called the patrician client system, right? So you have patricians with their clients. The clients had no political rights. They could neither vote in the voting committees. They can't be elected. They were bound to their sort of citizen, their patron, by religious tie. The worship of the patron's hearth was obligatory, but this worship did not confer upon them the rights of the city. So it's sort of like you live in Rome, but you're a client of this rich guy, and so you're not really a citizen of Rome. You can't really do in these votes, right? And that means you're a plebeian, right? These are the poor people, the people without land that work the fields for the people that did have land. Officially, the Romans didn't even call them people. They used to, the prayers that the rich Romans would say would for the people of Rome and for the plebeians of Rome. Like they would what assholes, So yeah. They had the big numbers, and you can imagine the title of this book is called Revolutions. Where do you think the revolutions came from? So we're going to come back to these plebs, but we have to introduce another major character in the power struggle of the city, Jay. So they all had their founding, defined king, priest, chief guy, but in accordance with the ancient beliefs, the heads of the family still had control over the family and the family's clients and the family's slaves. So if the potters control the people, the paters, that doesn't leave much room for the king. So the aristocracy, all the paters, realized if we can get together, this king is kind of effing everything up for us. He's trying to take our power. We need to grab the power back of all our clients. Let's all unite, and we can really limit the king's influence over the plebs, right? And this is the revolution. So the king was often sort of the chief priest of all the plebs, or the plebs, tribune of the plebs, and the aristocracy was all the rich patrician families were sort of the contrasting power bucket, right? So they were smart, Jay.
Oligarchy versus the dictator, and it's like,
this is the conflict.
A three-body problem of power, and
the aristocracy was smart. The people know the king because of the big religious ceremonies, the star of the show, the rock star. So we'll let the king keep the religious stuff, the rock star stuff, but as for the stuff that we want, the political power, we'll take that stuff away. This was the aristocracy's sort of battle plan, right? Let him be the rock star, but he actually has no power. And so this chapter, I'm skipping a lot of long stories of various kings, of Athens and Sparta and Rome, and there's tons of these stories of this revolution, this battle between aristocracy and plebs. Powerful kings would piss off the aristocracy, which would then, the aristocracy, what do they do, Jay? If you're a king, high percentage chance you're going to get assassinated in ancient world, right? So and then they would assassinate the king, install a puppet. The puppet would do everything the aristocracy wants. People would get mad. They'd be like, what the hell? We like that old king. This new king sucks, right? And then sometimes the puppet king would fight him back. Rome has this story of 7 kings, which is literally a back and forth story of this struggle. So Rome codified this, right?
But the main point here is that the aristocracy wants to put down all the plebs. And then the king's only regress against the aristocracy is to increase the power to the plebs, because that's his power base. It's just everybody, you know. So there's just a big back and forth. And you say here that the battle of king versus aristocracy was the first revolution of the city.
Yep.
And here we have a little quote about aristocracy governing the cities. Quote, a hereditary religion entitled this aristocracy to absolute dominion and gave it rights that appeared sacred. Yeah, so it's like our families are the most important families or whatever. I wonder how, like, what distinguished the aristocracy from the king? You know, he doesn't, I mean, I'm sure he does cover it, but we didn't exactly highlight why, you know, what the one king has to do. But yeah, I mean, this pattern plays out all through the medieval era. And like you read about any medieval European, Chinese, whatever. There's always going to be an aristocracy battling the king. The king wants to give more power back to the plebs so that they, you know, are his power base.
They can give him more power, exactly. Yeah. And so that's what he calls in the, you know, story of ancient cities, the first revolution, aristocracy versus king. He's now got a second revolution that cities went through.
Rise of the plebs.
Well, that's the Brother Book's name of it, but it is the second, and it should be the Rise of the Plebs is clearly the name it should have been. So, we'll support the people who give us more power. The subchapter title is Dismemberment of the Gens, because some of the gens paters would give extra rights and support in exchange for extra support from their clients. Right? But now you're kind of like ruining how this whole gens tribe fratry curie like system works, right?
Yeah.
And the gens was like the leader of the gens was like the big aristocracy guy. So it begins to disintegrate in this second revolution. You see that in the right of primogeniture, which is the right to give your will to your children. That starts to kind of get a little bit looser. That's an interesting sort of like thing that, you know, like it's not just about your family anymore. It's about the city, you know?
Yeah. So they're taking away the basis of the aristocracy was passing down everything you have to one family, which is the whole basis of your religion for the last 2,000 years, whatever, you know, has been that way. So you can see the Orthodox people, the conservatives, would be like, why can't I give my whole estate to, you know, my oldest son or whatever? But the king is like, no, I'm wise to this act, so I've got to, you know, start distributing the land to the plebs to get that power base. And you could see how it would start to be weakened over time. Numa, this is good, typical 1850s diction, this erosion democratizes property and status, symbolizing the plebeians' rising influence. They gain ground, not just socially, but politically, challenging old hierarchies. So,
and this is how eventually we get to the point where clients, the plebs, they become free. So they gained power, and there's a really good example, Jay. We're going to bring up our guy, Athenian King Solon, who made it a huge point. His whole thing, he's sort of like the famous first founder of a democratic city, Athens, Solon being the guy. And like the quote about him is, he wrested the earth from religion and gave it to labor. That's a great quote. Laws were changed. People could marry outside of their gens.
This book uses gens, curie, fratry.
I don't know
much. So confusing. I mean, you know, they're all just words for family groups and stuff. So you are lucky we're keeping all that stuff out of here. More of Solon's laws. No more debt slavery. That's a great law. You can't imagine a functioning society with people going into debt. I mean, maybe Rome did. Maybe that's why Rome fell, you know, like just relying on too many slaves. Eventually everybody's slaves, but Solon got rid of debt slavery. Here's a Britannica quote that I liked on Solon. This also places us in time again. Quote, responding to the early 6th century Athenian conflict between the landed aristocracy and the peasantry, Solon was called upon to mediate the inequities that denied government participation even to the intermediate classes.
The intermediate classes, Jay? Are they crazy?
I know. I mean, of course, there's no government for the plebs, of course.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even the intermediate classes.
Yeah. So Roman army was reorganized. No longer would clients march behind their patron. You were organized by your town now. This applied to voting. So you don't vote with your guy, you vote with your town. He includes a great story, Numa does, about the slow death of the power of the gens and the time of Cicero. This is actually a really interesting story, kind of tying this all together, because we all love Cicero. Cicero and Julius Caesar were, I don't know what to call them boys, but they were, they lived together, Yeah. So, in the time of Cicero, a man with some land died, and this gens leader came out of nowhere saying, this man's family is a client of my family, and since he died, this land should be mine. I own this land. The people of Cicero's time were like, what? That is some old law BS, bro. What are you talking about? And Numa points out to us that 400 years prior to the time of Cicero, it would have been obvious that this man's land should revert to the patron, right? So that's sort of that change in ancient religion and how that worked, illustrated also, by Cicero. So
Cicero is like 60, I think, what does it say? He was born 63 BC, so that's even like, served as consul in 63 BC. So that's, 500 years after Solon, so that's how things are developing. Mm-hmm. So even Solon's day, that was radical, to be giving power to the plebs and, and having everyone vote and stuff. And by Cicero's day, it was a bit more, you'd have to be like super orthodox to think that the land should revert back to the family or whatever.
This old guy really here. Yeah, this guy is so country boy, classic, old timey. I can't believe he believes this gen stuff,
money.
Right?
Yeah, so
old money.
The rise of the plebs is also was supported by improvements in military technology, because it used to be that only the rich could afford horses and chariots, and the cavalry was so much better, and you just can't fight that, especially because nobody was able to train in a standing army long enough to be like an organized, good fighting force. So you stand no chance to horse and chariot. But eventually, you get shields, you get training, you get strategy, you get better materials and stuff, and all of a sudden, you can start battling like phalanxes and stuff. We're able to neutralize horses and chariots and whatever. So now the plebs, all of a sudden, organized enough. It's a lot more powerful.
Right. And it's like, we need these plebs. We need more phalanxes. That's the word. It's like you put your shield with your spear like out of it. You're like unstoppable. And like, we need a lot more plebs, so if they need more power if they're going to fight, well, we need them to fight. So another sort of a reign of Servius in Rome. He was the king of Rome from 578 to 535 BC, Servius. And this guy helped a lot with plebeian rights. So this is one of those kings that was a pro-pleb king. First Roman king to give land directly to the plebs. Not necessarily Roman land exactly, conquered land, but still good move, Servius.
Still good move, yeah.
He published laws for the relationship between plebs and patricians. So we're not equal, but at least you have laws too. He created 4 new tribes of the plebs, gave them all their own festivals. Dude, that's pretty big, right? So, bang, plebeians have religions now. Welcome to the big show, guys. Like, we are here. We're, Servius reorganized. Right?
Servius, what a guy. We don't know anything about Servius.
He organized the Roman army into centuries, divided by their tribe, not which patrician they were enslaved to. And we all know, like, I'm a big Rome guy, like, the centuries are badass. The reorganization of the military led to reforms in public governance. Now 6 patrician centuries and the 12 plebeian knights voted first. After them, the centuries of the infantry, and so down the ranks of the every soldier's voice was heard. Centuries of conflict between patricians and plebs eventually resulted in protests by the plebs leaving the city and founding their own. And then the patricians realized, whoa, if they all leave, we got no army. That leaves us in Troubletown, USA. And so, sounds like we got to negotiate. Sounds like the first, union walkout almost, by the way.
Yeah.
And we certainly don't want them to join the city at the same rank as us. Who would dare suggest such a travesty? But they do need something. We got to keep them around. Bang. Let's invent the Tribune of the Plebs. So that is the story of the invention of the Tribune of the Plebs, which is like where Dan Carlin picks up his story on the decline and fall of Rome is the invention of this Tribune of the Plebs guy. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, there you go.
Yeah, patricians say plebs will give you tribune to represent your interests. They can't make laws. They can't vote. So it does sound like what are they giving him? But he has veto power. That's kind of interesting. That sounds like a very technical thing to argue to a big, a group of riffraff. You got veto power. Who knows how it went down, but, some technicality. They gave him a tribune. And at the creation of the tribune, they performed a special ceremony, blessing the tribune with protection. That must have been very important. He was treated the same as a patrician religious object that should never be touched. When the tribuneship passed to a new person, the ceremony transferred this sacrosanct blessing to the new tribune. So there's another example, the religion, the spirituality being tied up with law. It's the only way to get law is to imbue it with kind of a sacral power, that's able to memify itself into everyone's brain, so they treat you the same and.
Dude, this blessing had such a strong religious belief that if a patrician met the tribune of the plebs in a street, the patrician would go home and take a shower because they can't, it's like that's how clean they had to be. Wow. Punishment for hurting a tribune, they'll take all your family's money and you may be killed with impunity. You're absolutely dead to us, right? So the Senate was still reserved for the aristocracy only, but the plebs at least had a voice now, right? And smart tribunes learned how to wield this weird MC Hammer, can't touch this power. They would literally place themselves between plebeians who were being arrested because you can't touch me, and it means you can't touch him.
Yeah.
They had no formal power, but they had this mystical power, this kind of soft influence. They're clearly walking. Everyone knows the tribune. You're walking around, you're kind of star of the show. You're gonna know. If the tribune calls a gathering, you basically got to let the gathering go because you can't screw up. You'll hurt the tribune. The tribunes would walk right into the Senate temple and cause chaos. Can't touch him. He's untouchable. He's in here probably screaming and shouting and telling us terrible things, but literally we can't touch him. So, but it only, because it was a city religion, the tribuneship protections only went as far as the city, the city boundary. Remember we talked about that plow, that Pomeranian
boundary
or whatever?
Gods. There were even gods of the boundaries in between. Oh, it's so great.
Dude!
Oh, the boundary.
Dude, we talked about earlier that they would do rituals with their boundary gods and pour wine on the boundary rocks and shit. I mean, the boundary was so, dude, that plow, you lift it up and you it's just crazy. What's really going on here, Jay?
Basically, we have two sets of laws. We have laws for plebs, laws for patricians. At some point, it became useful to a few powerful patricians to add more plebs. Obviously, you need more power. And why we're bringing MLK. You say MLK would say the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice, and for plebs, bending towards equality. From 1500 to 500 BC, the stuff's getting better for plebs, more power, because more patricians, more kings are vying for your vote, for your manpower, whatever, for your corn. Eventually, wow. So at some point, in that 1,000-year span, plebs and patricians can marry. Came a time when plebs and patricians agreed to be governed under one set of laws. And for some cities, it came through enlightened kings. Other cities, like Rome, had civil wars that decided those things. So, Spartacus, I don't think won, but that was a slave rebellion that almost defeated Rome. So you can imagine way back in Rome's history, the plebs fighting against it and, a deal being struck eventually.
That is the revolutions. We create the religion, create a city. The city goes through these major power struggles, these revolutions that Numa talks about. We're going to go over some of the key law creation documents. If you were in Rome and you were a Roman child of Julius Caesar, you learned about the Code of the 12 Tables. That was Rome's first set of laws, right?
Yeah.
If you grew up in Athens, you would learn the Code of Solon. I call these types of things. This is the first democratic laws in the world. This is it. You might call it the blastocyst of democracy right here, dude. That's what we're talking, dude.
Someone's married to a bio PhD. Perfect.
There it is. Yeah.
The 12 tables. I just looked it up. The top little thing says the law of the 12 tables was a set of laws inscribed on 12 bronze tablets created in ancient Rome in 450 BCE. So what is that, 2,500 years ago? They were the beginning of a new approach to laws which were now passed by government and written down so that all citizens may be treated equally before them. Wow. I mean, it's like a
Yes.
10 commandments of, we won't call it democracy, but,
Yep.
some slightly more equitable form of government that everybody, it's like the code. Everyone can access the code. This is what, this is what you do. This is what's expected. These are punishments. I mean, I don't know exactly what it said, but you got.
Well, I got what it said right here.
Publicly available, and then everyone can access it. So tell us what it says.
I got what it says right here, the Code of 12 Tables. I also call it an absolute banger of a rights-granting document. Law number 1, quote, what the people vote becomes law. Number 1, with the passage of this code, Rome removed itself from the tyranny of religious rule. So first of all, it's
450 BC. That's when the transition occurred from, the gods telling me this to it's written on bronze. Look
People
it up
vote.
in the main temple. Don't come back, read them, and then talk to me.
No rules come from the gods. Rules can change. Rules come from the votes of the people. That's it. That's a big change to your city's religion. And now everyone can take part in the city religion of democracy. We're calling it a major nail in the coffin for the patrician class. Everybody's a patrician now. If you say that in the I'm the captain now from Voice or whatever, but everyone's a patrician now, right? 12 tables still mirrored ancient law a lot. Dad's in charge. As long as son is alive, son doesn't get to vote. We talked about Solon, like his code, the code of Solon.
So Solon was roughly, maybe 150 years before in Athens. He was the king of Athens, and he was the one that kind of came up with the Solon's code is like the 12 tables for Athens, the start of Athenian democracy. And actually, that one went further, obviously, because that was the start.
Yep.
But he was a for the people kings, one of those that was really like, okay, the only way I'm going to get shit done around here is to take pull the rug out from the aristocracy and start distributing some of this power because they're holding everything back, holding everyone down. The plebs are pissed. They're going to, riot. So what did he do?
Yeah, one of his top things was he let you give to both of your sons. Your will. You could split up your will a little bit. That was a big one, kind of, loosening up the power of single families because now we're creating 2 families out of each one. So you still couldn't give to women, though, unfortunately. Sorry, ladies, but we're getting there, Solon. Thank you. So now we're subchapter 9, the new principle of government, public interest.
One other thing, Solon, in his Solon's constitution was based on 4 classes, although determined by census and wealth, and although privilege by birth was eliminated, he retained a hierarchical distribution of political responsibility. His legal code replaced Draco's harsh laws, except for those concerning homicide. So you can't commit homicide. But that's funny. We get Draconian and Draco Malfoy from the Draco that Solon. Draco must have been a total asshole who Solon replaced, and the plebs liked him much more.
Wow.
Good for Solon's constitution.
Dude,
Solon, by the way, we looked this guy up. He was a poet. He was like kind of a younger guy in a battle with someone, and he like spit some poetry that psyched everyone up so much. They won the battle, voted him general or something, and that was the start of his political career. He was a poet.
Dude.
But, I mean, when you think of poet, orator, your songs was his word for laws, like, there's just a lot more going on, and your spirituality was mediated through the poetry and your language and the words and the rites and the incantations or whatever. You have a lot more spiritual power there, so it's, and I mean, you're only talking with 5,000 other people. That was the Athens at the time, probably.
Right. That was must have been a banger of a speech, whatever poem he recited.
Banger, dude. Yeah. I mean, would make a great little montage in a movie.
Yeah. So now we're at subchapter 9, the new principles of government, public interest. We get starting off with a quote, common with man. When he rejects old institutions, he still preserves their exterior forms. So even though we're getting more equality, we got religion for everyone, we still kept consuls, we still had sacrifices, we still had the same basic city religious stuff. It's just that the city religion changed, but the rituals didn't really change, right? The regulating principle from which all public institutions derive their authority changed. from God to public interest. Right, but the rituals didn't really change, just like where the power came from changes. So Solon, we talked about him, just one of the thousands of kings throughout all the cities of the ancient world that pushed the city along the arc towards equality. Obviously, he's one of the best, and Athens has got some hype. And I was just going to say on Solon, unfortunately for the English language, Draconian is a lot more known than Solon, but apparently he shouldn't be. Even Solon said, my laws should only last 100 years, which is a great quote by him. Another quote by Solon as well. Hey, Solon, did you give your city the best constitution it could have? No, bro, I did not. But I did give the one best suited to it. Direct quote with the bro. The nature of government is changed. It used to be run the religious ceremonies. Now it's maintain peace within and power without. The public interest was not a principle that could long authorize an inequality among the public. It inevitably conducted societies towards democracy.
Okay, so now we're on a fourth revolution. We're on subchapter 10, aristocracy of wealth and reestablishment of democracy. I don't know where that's coming from. There's a time in the history of every city known to us where the well-to-do class was in possession of the government, which we know already, we've been talking about. So when just the rich people have control, people kneel. Okay, let's skip this.
Rules of democracies, chapter 11. Subchapter 11, we should say. As more men leave their ancient religion behind, cities become harder to govern. More rules, more machinery. We do a deep dive on the machinery of ancient Athenian democracy. Sounds incredible. People would practice their oratory at great length. Then at the right time, they're given the floor and their point is heard at length. People listen. People ask questions.
Here's a good quote.
Eloquence is the spring of democratic government.
You're only dealing with 5,000 people, and you're just talking. You just get together at the Agora, I think it was in Athens, and you just chat. You just try to convince people of things. That's why, like in Rome, oratory, persuasion, those were like the highest arts and stuff. Because that was all that happened. It was just words to other people who gave words to other people, and that was the whole machinery of governance.
Dude, listen to these examples of these governance sessions, these democratic sessions. They're described, lots of people describe them. People are listening with open mouths. Men are reflecting together. They're trying to learn from each other. They're weighing different reasons and purposes. Can you imagine, Jay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Dude, this is a great check on Athenian democracy. Check this out. If you authored a new proposal and it passed, your name is on it. But if your law fucks up later, you get blamed for it.
That's skin in the game.
That's serious skin in the game. If you bring up laws that are already illegal 3 times in a session, you are no longer allowed to bring up new legislation, dude. Members of Athenian democracy, obviously paters only, but they needed to attend deliberation days 3 days per month. So think about that. That was basically, let's call it once a week. You're in a government deliberation day, right? So every third year, you'd spend the entire year in a city clerk job, right? Aristotle famously said, quote, a man who needs to labor all day cannot be a citizen. You just don't have enough time. These are, think of what a citizen really requires, right?
So there's too many chapters that we didn't have very much information on. One's rich and poor. Democracy perishes, popular tyrants. So a little bit of populism here. Mm-hmm. We'll just give you some quotes to add flavor. The democracy did not suppress poverty, but on the contrary, rendered it more perceptible. So if you're I'm like a voting citizen, but I don't have shit, and this guy's got, 20 estates, because obviously with the democracy, the aristocracy is still going to be running shit, Right. There's some revolutions in Sparta. Sparta obviously enslaved everyone around them, and that's how they were just full-time soldiers. It's all they did. They just trained, ate, hung out with the boys, and then went to war every once in a while and enslaved everyone around them. So those people, talking about them, quote, for all had such hatred for their masters that there was not a single one among them who did not declare that it would be agreeable to eat them raw. Everybody, would you eat them raw? Yep. Eat them raw? Yep. That was Sparta's worst fear throughout their entire history is, we've got to keep these people down, And it's these people speaking the exact same language, same accent, probably, they're 20 minutes that way, and those are your slaves, and your whole existence is how do we keep them from fighting back against us, But obviously there's revolutions and plebs get power and whatever, so that's what we're talking about here. After cities started fighting internally over rights, they could start fighting externally for city interests. So, obviously there's lots of civil conflict, but you get everyone connected together, the gods are going great. We love our founders' bones. Let's go get those founders' bones, and you could see how those cities start getting bigger and bigger.
And that brings us to book 5, the municipal regime disappears. This is like the chapter 5, book 5, whatever.
The very end. Yeah, this is all stuff. You didn't have any of this in the outline here. This is all stuff I added just today, actually. There's 3 little subchapters here. First one, New Beliefs. Philosophy changes the principles and the rules of politics. So this is around 500 BC. He places us in time, one of the few, markers in time, once again, that we've talked about. The domestic religions start giving way. And here, this is he's talking about people in Greece. This is like Heraclitus and Demosthenes, all famous writers, thinkers, whatever. Someone asked one of the guys, what territory are you from? I call him a new atheist because he's kind of the, fighting back against the orthodoxy. And he says, the universe is my territory. I'm not from one town, I'm from the universe, which that's a very humanist impulse, and you could, even now, imagine there's no borders or countries or whatever that John Lennon song is. Quote, men understood that gods no longer belonged each to a family or to a city, but that they all belonged to the human race and watched over the universe. So this is kind of the arc of Solon, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They're all kind of getting the gods out and they're thinking rationally through things and starting to be like, oh, people are people no matter where they are, whatever. We're getting a little bit more intellectual. But one thing that those Greeks never thought was let's build an empire. Like I mentioned earlier, Plato's Republic was just imagining cities of 5,000, He still it's kind of, I get Thomas Jefferson vibes, like we're still thinking little agrarian villages, planted here and there, and we can all be citizens of the universe, but we're not going to be conquering each other, and that's where they miss out, because Alexander comes from the north, and who knows what he was thinking. To contrast Alexander and the Greeks, why did Rome develop and not have Alexander? Do you know this? This is when Alexander's dying. He died when he was like 30 or something. He's all the way in India. He's out there dying. He's conquered the Persian Empire, the first empire in human history, went 2,000 miles away and died. And on his deathbed, quote, according to Diodorus, an ancient Greek historian, Alexander's companions asked him on his deathbed to whom he bequeathed his kingdom. His laconic reply was toi kratistoi, to the strongest.
I pledge my kingdom to the strongest. That is badass. Okay, and now we got JD wrote down this hot take on Rome. I love this, dude. Let her rip. Amateur take.
Greece developed all these things, all these institutions, but they just never took it to, they never had that universal impulse of conquering everybody like Rome did. So why did Rome win? This is my little amateur take, and partly from reading this book. Greek institutions, a little bit of proselytizing, universal religion. They just built, they made everyone become Romans, and they had mafia levels of military recruitment. I mean, in another book I read.
And training.
Yeah, I mean, just like everybody, all your sons, everybody, they're all taken into the military. You're all conquering people. And you know what? We're going to give you a little slice of the pie. We're not going to tax you too hard, but we're going to ask for your sons or your cousins or nephews or whatever. They're going to come fight, but they're going to get a slice of the pie. And like you mentioned earlier, Rome was a mix of 5 different tribes. So they were able to blend their religion, be like, we're a little Etruscan, we're a little Sabine, come on in. Our temples are big enough for everybody. And they converted everyone into Romans. So that was the big, their religious secret sauce was just basically like, hey, just give up. and become a Roman with us. We've got good institutions. We'll give you a slice.
You get some of that. You called it Victor Spoils Universal Basic Income (UBI). A little bit of that spoils right there.
Yes.
We'll get some of this.
We got a UBI of spoils trickling in on the reg. Yeah, so it was almost like a chameleon sort of religion.
Yeah, and sorry, what you're saying on sort of the conquering aspect is if you're not a conquering city, then you're eventually going to get conquered. And you even go Rome went on an all-out conquer bender for 500 years, dude.
That is a great phrase, conquer bender. Yeah. We're not going to cover exactly why. Who knows? But, because it's hundreds of years of doing that. But for whatever reason, they kept going. And it's such an interesting, you mentioned Romulus came from Alba. Well, that was one of their biggest battles, and that was one of the very sacrilegious things that they did, was they attacked Alba. So they were a colony of Alba, and then they converted Alba into a subservient city. And that was, you can imagine the Orthodox people in Rome being like, we should not do this. The gods would hate this. They would despise what we're doing. And the Romans are like, nah. Let's do it. I don't know what was going through their heads, but they did. And then I say here that any Genghis Khan can conquer, but Rome's secret sauce was, quote, it admitted among its gods those of the vanquished peoples, and other quote, Rome knew how to make itself loved by those whom it subdued. So it's kind of like Caesar. Wasn't he a little bit, lax?
Oh, dude, he would I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to love you. You're going to be the new leader of this town, but you got to be on my team now, right?
Yeah, and so that be on my team sounds a little bit like assimilation to Christianity. And so the book ends with basically Christianity was the end of, what I'm covering, what Numa was covering in the book, and the ancient religion thing. So here's some quotes. Christianity, by preaching to all men brotherhood and equality before God, introduced into the world an element unknown to ancient politics. Totally unheard of. The Roman thing was probably crazy. We can all become, that doesn't make any sense. But it works, evolutionarily. That's a better strategy, so that wins. Another quote. The Christian religion was not merely a religion of the citizens of one city. It was the religion of an empire, even more of the universe. Yeah, that another kind of unheard of.
Yeah, Christianity broke down the barriers between nations, made the laws of the city give way before the law of Christ, opened the way for a new social order. Previously, every man had to make a god for himself. There were as many of them as there were families and cities. Now God appeared unique, immense, universal, alone animating the world, alone able to supply the need of adoration that is in man. It accepts everyone, and ancient religion dies, Jay.
Mm-hmm. The first big sentence for this last chapter of the book is just too perfect of a sum up for the whole book. So here's all the ideas. This is a long paragraph here. Quote. The victory of Christianity marks the end of ancient society.
Perfect.
With the new religion, the social transformation which we saw begun 6 or 7 centuries earlier was completed. To understand how much the principles and the essential rules of politics were changed, we need only recollect that ancient society had been established by an old religion whose principal dogma was that every god protected exclusively a single family or a single city and existed only for that. This was the time of the domestic gods and the city protecting divinities. These religion had produced laws, the relations among men, property, inheritance, legal proceedings, all were regulated not by the principles of natural equity, but by the dogmas of this religion and with the view to the requirements of its worship. It was this religion that had established a government among men, that of the father in the family, that of the king or the magistrate in the city. All had come from religion. That is to say, from the opinion that man had entertained of the divinity. That's an old phrase, the entertained of the divinity. Religion, law, and government were commingled and had been but a single thing under 3 different aspects. We have sought to place in clear light this social system of the ancients, where religion was absolute master both in public and private life, where the state was a religious community, the king a pontiff, the magistrate a priest, and the law a sacred formula, where patriotism was piety and exile excommunication, where individual liberty was unknown, where man was enslaved to the state through his soul, his body, and his property, where this is such a long sentence, where the notions of law and of duty, of justice and of affection were bounded within the limits of the city, where human association was necessarily confined within a certain circumference around a Britannium, and where men saw no possibility of founding larger societies. Such were the characteristic traits of the Greek and Italian cities of the first period of their history.
Wow. And Dan Carlin, quoting Tiberius Gracchus, Rome influencer in the plebeian populist revolutions, speaking to the army of Rome to give you a sense of the sanctioned religion and how it affected the soldiers. Quote, "The beasts of the field and the birds of the air have their holes in their hiding places, but the men who fight and die for Italy enjoy only the light in the air. Our generals urge their soldiers to fight for the graves and shrines of their ancestors. Their appeal is idle and false. You cannot point to a paternal altar. You have no ancestral tomb. You fight and die to give wealth and luxury to others. You're called the masters of the world, but there's not a foot of ground you can call your own." So, bang!
Yeah, there's like the revolution there in the religion, and that's where people are thinking, that's a great quote.
Dude, is this book not an incredible way to look at how society formed?
Yeah, this book is a lot better than I expected. Reading it sucks. It was not a fun book to read. A lot of fratry and just teeny tiny little details all throughout the book. But the heart of this book is fascinating. And breaking it down like this and thinking about it more evolutionarily, and it just totally makes sense. Definitely changes my perspective on viewing, modern religion, but laws. We're going to talk more about asabiya, which is that Arabic phrase for community or something. It's a concept of social solidarity with an emphasis on unity, group consciousness, and cultures that develop that sense win. Rome was united, and they conquered people. The Greeks were united against Persia, and they beat Persia, and you just see how all those things were created. Well done. I would not have chosen to do this one, but it's a good one.
Thank you, Numa. 1864, bro. Thank you all for listening. Subscribe to us on Spotify and check us out on YouTube. Give us a like and a follow and a whatever. Peace.